Welcome to the World of Eora, a news and lore podcast about Pillars of Eternity and Avowed, as created by Obsidian Entertainment. I'm your host, Eric, aka Gingerino. Thank you all for listening. Let's get into today's lore. Hello everybody and welcome to another episode of the World of Eora. I'm your host Eric, aka Gingerino. Thanks for joining me on yet another episode as we dive into the history, lore, and game mechanics for Pillars of Eternity 1 and 2 as we gear up for the release of Avowed. For those wondering why we pair Pillars of Eternity with Avowed, it's because they share the same fantasy setting known as Eora. So as the theory goes, if we dive into those first two Pillars of Eternity games, we can understand the world a little bit better and therefore appreciate the nuance and the writing that Avowed is sure to have when it undergoes release. As well, it's just a way for those of us who love Pillars of Eternity to dive into a world that we know and love, perhaps revisit it after being gone for a while, or just get into different fantasy worlds, whatever you're into. If you are brand new to the show, welcome to the show. Happy to have you here. I will signpost you towards episode number, 0, technically speaking, where I signpost you even further to episodes that might be better to listen to first, more foundational lore for this world that we're going to get into. But today's episode is beginner-friendly if you do want to start here. In today's episode, we're going to have a little more of an Avowed focus, but we're not going to be ignoring the Pillars of Eternity lore entirely either. We're going to be talking about 2 of the 4 companions that we see in Avowed. Now, we can't talk about them at length, obviously, because Avowed is not yet out, and so we haven't seen the character arcs for these people. But I thought it would be good to note the backgrounds of these characters, what kind of people they are, and how they might interact in the game of Avowed, and how their particular interests or personality or backgrounds interact with what we know from the world at large that we see in the Pillars of Eternity game. In particular, we're going to be talking about the Dwarven Ranger companion known as MARIUS, and we're going to be talking about the Orlan Wizard companion known as YATZLI. 2 very different characters in terms of where they come from and what they're doing and in their personality, but both very likely to be also very interesting to have alongside with us. These are 2 of the 4 companions that we can have, the other 2 being Kai and Giata, both of which I've done their own episodes on earlier in this podcast. If you want to go check them out, just again, kind of like this episode, discussing a bit about their background, who and what they are, and where their backgrounds tie into the world at large through the lens of lore we see from Pillars of Eternity 1 and 2. No Avowed-related news to go over today, but we do have some Obsidian-related and Pillars-related news to talk about. As far as Avowed goes, the only thing I noticed was that there was an article put out by Game Rant talking about character creation in Avowed being a double-edged sword, talking about how it doesn't have the same depth that Pillars of Eternity character creation has, but it might allow for a deeper experience in one area of the World of Eora. So it draws this comparison between, I guess I should have said breadth of Pillars of Eternity. In the Pillars of Eternity character creation, you have a lot more races you can choose from, you select a specific class and backgrounds, and there's a lot more breadth in that character creation, whereas in Avowed, we kind of have a preset character for us in the sense of we come from one specific place, we are a specific race, and so there's a lot that's already chosen for us in Avowed compared to Pillars of Eternity. And this article talks about how it's a double-edged sword in the sense of, like, on the one hand, we don't get that breadth of character so that we can, like, roleplay as an Amawa, for example, which is, some people would say, is a loss, but the trade-off for that is that we can go deeper into this one type of character. So we're very likely to learn more about what it means to be an Adiran. We're very likely to understand the lore and the background and history of this particular character. So instead of getting a wider range of options, we're going to go deeper into the one. So depending on the type of gamer you are, that might sound like good or bad news. For me, personally, I like this idea. If I want to play as any one of those other characters, I will happily replay Pillars of Eternity, which I often do. So there was an article for that. In regards to Pillars of Eternity itself, Josh Sawyer was recently on an interview for, I believe it's Limit Break, or Limit Break Network, I suppose. And Josh Sawyer, he was the lead game designer for Pillars of Eternity. And when asked a question about Pillars of Eternity and its return, or where it's at in terms of the Obsidian staff, he talked about this notion that there are a number of staff over at Obsidian who have pitched the idea of a Pillars of Eternity tactics game. As we know, the World of Eora, which is where Pillars of Eternity and Avowed are set, is an IP that is owned by Obsidian, so they're free to do with it as they please, or they could even license it out to other developers if they wanted to as well. And so playing different genres of game and playing different stories within the world is definitely an option. And having a Pillars of Eternity tactics game, although I'm sure it would be named something else, is definitely something that they could do or that they could outsource to another developer if they wanted to. Well, I guess if it's getting pitched around the office, I'm sure they would want to do it themselves. But it would definitely be interesting. I know it's not the same genre as a cRPG or an action RPG as we've seen so far, but it would definitely be an interesting take on the world. Me personally, I'm not huge into tactics games, but this would probably be the one to get me into it. So Obsidian, if you are considering doing that, just know that there are a number of people excited, myself included, and this might be an entry point for a lot of those people. Or at least me, anyways. I know you maybe don't care about just one individual, but there you go. So that's some news. There's not really much else about that, though. There's no confirmation that that's what they're going to do, and this is just an idea that's been tossed around. I'm sure if it was something that was greenlighted, that Josh Sawyer probably wouldn't be talking about it so freely, so I don't know if that's actually an indicator that perhaps this won't happen. And the last piece of news that we're going to do doesn't have anything to do with Avowed or Pillars of Eternity, but is Obsidian related. If you are into the game of Grounded, which I have gotten into recently, they recently put a patch out, 1.4.5, as an update for Grounded. It was a rather hefty patch that apparently didn't do a ton of things, but the most notable thing that it did do is that it removed a requirement for Microsoft logging in or an Xbox account if you play Grounded on Steam, which means that you can freely just play with other Steam people. You don't have to log into Xbox like you do have to do with Sony games on Steam, so it just removed that requirement. I think as a kind of a response to gamers everywhere not liking this required logging into third-party things to just use your PC games or something like that. It's happened with Sony. You have to log into a Sony account to be able to play Sony PC games, and people have largely viewed that as negative. And so perhaps that's why Grounded has done this. It kind of sucks that you had this massive update out of nowhere, but I mean, if you have high enough internet speed, then it's all fine and dandy. But there you go. That's all the news as it relates to any of you listening today. Let's dive into the lore of MARIUS and YATZLI.
You are the last visitor to my sanctum, though you come too late, just as Lilith did before you.
So first, let's begin with MARIUS, and then we'll move into YATZLI. And that was Scott White, the voice actor for MARIUS in the game of Diablo 4, voicing Rathma, by the way. That was what that transition was. MARIUS has been the third revealed companion, or fourth, depending on how you want to look at it. We did get a look at him earlier than we got a look at YATZLI, but we never really got any information about him firsthand until, I think, after YATZLI. So, depending on how you want to put it, but MARIUS is one of the four companions that we get in Avowed. The first two I've done episodes on is Kai and Giada. Kai is the Amawan person. He's kind of got that teal-colored skin. It's actually a little bit more fish-like, kind of has scales to it. And Giada is the Animancer lady who had her parents die in the Living Lands as a result of a lab accident. We meet Giada, I believe, in the same place that we meet YATZLI, or at least the same biome. So I expect to run into them around roughly the same time, but who knows. We'll talk about YATZLI in a minute, but first let's get started with MARIUS. I don't know MARIUS's last name, so we only have that to go from. MARIUS is voiced by Scott White, who is famously known as the voice of Rathma in Diablo 4, which you would have heard in the transition to the lore just now. We see him in the gameplay demo where Obsidian was demonstrating a little bit more. This was before the gameplay demo that we recently had. This was, I think, back in January. We see him talking with Kai when we're in the biome of the Emerald Stair, which indicates to me that we run into MARIUS before we run into YATZLI and potentially before we run into Giada, although I'm not 100% sure on that. Giada might be outside of the Emerald Stair when we first meet her. But it seems like we run into Kai pretty early on, potentially one of the first people we actually interact with in the game of Avowed, and then at some point between there and the Emerald Stair biome, which the player character was around, I think, level 8 when they were in that biome, we run into MARIUS. So we don't know the situation or circumstance that the Envoy, which is the player character from Avowed, we don't know the circumstance for which the Envoy meets MARIUS, what their meet cute is, but it seems pretty early on in the game. As far as his personality goes, Kerry Patel, who is the lead game director for Avowed, described him as a little more reserved and a little more cautious than the other companions. We know that Marius is a mountain dwarf, which is also, I believe, an optapo in this world. He's specifically from the culture of people known as the Pargrunen, which is a older culture of dwarves. They originally came from a nation known as Old Valia or Grand Valia in the time of its heyday. That nation of Old Valia, however, has since then collapsed by the modern times of these games, but the Pargrunen dwarves were a group of dwarves that came from that. The Pargrunen dwarves, like many dwarves, have this natural proclivity towards exploration, which is why you can actually find dwarven ruins dotted throughout the world of Eora. Oftentimes, dwarves will go to a location, they'll settle down, they'll set up little cities and settlements, and then get a wanderlust, if you will, and move on, or their settlements will fail because they don't have this long-term focus on an area. At least that's depending on the group, obviously. It's not a uniform thing across the entire race, but this is pretty typical for dwarves. The Pargrunen dwarves, again, they originated from Valia. They have established settlements in places like the White March, which is an area in the first Pillars of Eternity game, just north of the Deerwood. You can actually go to this location. They obviously have a settlement in Old Valia, despite the fact that the nation has collapsed. And they have one here in the Living Lands in a place called Solus. And they probably have more throughout the world as well. In fact, we can actually explore some of that lore in a little bit. But let's turn our focus to Marius on the little bit of lore that we have. Along with Kai and Giada and YATZLI, there is a cosplayer's guide on the Obsidian website. So if you're interested at all in cosplaying as Marius, or just interested in what he might look like, you can go onto Obsidian's website. I believe it's avowed.obsidian.net, and you can download the cosplay guide for Marius. In the cosplay guide, aside from what he looks like, we also get a little bit of a description about Marius as a person. And it reads as, Marius is a recent transplant from Solus, an isolated Pargrunen keep in the harsh region of Galawain's Tusks. Born into one of the most uninhabitable areas of the Living Lands, Marius learned quickly how to survive and even thrive in the wilderness, becoming one of the land's most sought-after hunters and guides. The downside is, now that he has left Solus for the wider wilderness, he has yet to find a place to call home, and he feels more comfortable facing the dangers and hazards of the wild than he does among the comforts of civilization. So we'll just touch on a little bit of what's going on there. So he's a recent transplant from Solus, which is a Pargrunen keep and settlement of Pargrunen dwarves in the region of Galawain's Tusks, which is one of the biomes in the game of Avowed, on the continent or large island of the Living Lands. It is considered the second oldest of the three major settlements. As I've mentioned, the Pargrunen dwarves, they do have a wanderlust about them. The name for themselves is Aptapo. Those are the Aptapo dwarves, which means mountain dwarves. And they have the Pargrunen have a distinct identity and kinship in their culture. They consider all Pargrunen people, whether they're in Solus or whether they're in the White March or Old Valia, they consider all Pargrunen kin, regardless of where they live. They keep their history alive through many traditions, such as cantex, which are chants and rituals of purpose, and they actually can use these cantex as way to unlock dwarven strongholds through means of magic. I'm reading this directly off of the Pargrunen entry on pillarsofeternity.fandom.com, by the way, in case anyone wants to read more. And they're great explorers and builders, as we can see when we explore their area. Now, again, returning back to Solus, Solus is one of the main settlements that they have set up throughout the world, at least that we know of through the lore. And it's almost certainly there's a scene in one of the earlier Avowed trailers that came out within the last couple of years where there is a drawbridge being lowered. In fact, this is the first place we even get a screenshot of Marius and his backside. That drawbridge lowering, I am willing to bet, is the region in which Solus is. In fact, I think that's probably actually the place of Solus. Considering it looks like a stronghold, it looks like a castle keep, and that is pretty indicative of a lot of the stuff that we have seen the Pargrunen dwarves do. At least in the White March, we've seen them capable of that kind of craftsmanship and engineering. But yeah, so this is a settlement and group of Optapo mountain dwarves of the Pargrunen nature in the region of Galawain's Tusks, which we don't know a lot about. We do have some images that you can get from the Obsidian website of Galawain's tusks. The pictures that we have show a statue that is under construction. This image is labeled the God's Shrine, so this is obviously in tribute of one of the gods. I'm guessing Galawain. It kind of looks Galawainian, which is always something fun to say. We also see, if you remember, the Inquisitor Lodween character, the lady with the fire eyes. We also see her kicking down a dwarf in a scene in the trailers from here as well. So the Galawain's Tusks biome has actually been featured in trailers a little bit. There's another photo as well of some ruined, what I'm guessing is ruined dwarven sites, but I don't actually know for sure. But that picture is labeled as Slumbering Fields, so who knows, maybe there was a battle there or something like that. Now, I would be tempted to say that because we run into Marius, that we would be in Galawain's Tusks before we go to the Emerald Stair, where YATZLI is, but because of what we read about Marius, going back to his original lore, that he has left Solace to be a hunter and a guide, I'm willing to bet we actually run into him probably in the first or even second biome of the area. So I'm guessing when we go to Solace in the game of Avowed, we are returning with Marius, in the sense that Marius is returning after having been gone for a long time. So yeah, that's the description of Solace. It is a settlement. We don't know a lot about it. We know a little bit more about the people group that created it. The only other thing that we have in reference to it is a tablet that you can find in the White March DLC for the first Pillars of Eternity game that talks about a settlement in the Living Lands, although we didn't know it was called Solace at the time. And all it says is, we plant ourselves in a strange and wild land, but remember well our roots. Though we are distant, know us still as kin. That doesn't really give us any information about it, just that it's in the Living Lands. It's considered a strange and wild place. That's nothing new about the Living Lands if you've been paying attention to the lore for that. This description of Marius gives way to the fact that he is what would be considered a ranger character. There aren't classes in the game of Avowed. You will build a character through selected perks and abilities as you level up, compared to Pillars of Eternity, where at the beginning of character creation, you selected a character class. You still chose abilities as you leveled up, but it was stuck within the class tree that you selected at the beginning of the game. But Marius definitely leans more towards the ranger type, and it matches the description of him being a hunter and a guide, especially one that is sought after. So what we do learn about Marius after he was born into one of the most uninhabitable areas of the Living Lands, which I'm guessing refers to Galawain's Tusks, that matches the images we see and also the descriptions of Galawain's Tusks. He left Solace and learned how to survive within the wilderness, so I'm guessing probably in one of the biomes that are a little more forested, and he became a sought-after hunter and guide. So Marius has made a name for himself. I originally kind of thought of him as someone who was just like a hermit in the woods, but it seems like people have actually sought out Marius, and perhaps maybe that's how we meet him. Maybe we are trying to get somewhere and we're asking for directions, and people are like, I don't know, but I can tell you who does know how to get there. It's that guy over in the corner there at the bar or whatever, or in a weird place in the market, or if you like go to this shack in the middle of the woods in this direction, you'll find this dwarf and he'll know what to do. Perhaps that's how we meet Marius, is because he's made for a name for himself as a hunter and a guide in the region. And it seems like his companion story or his character arc is going to be about trying to find a place called home, because it talks here about how he left Solace and now he's a hunter and a guide, but that he, even though he likes the wider wilderness, he has yet to find a place to call home. He feels more comfortable facing dangers and hazards in the wild than he does among the comforts of civilization. So I'm guessing your player character, the Envoy, is going to have a big say into how he finds home or what he describes home as. Maybe we'll push him in the direction back to Solace with his fellow Pergrunen. Maybe we'll convince him to stay in a different region, or perhaps we'll convince him that home isn't any one place. Maybe it's wherever you are, or maybe it's where the people that you love are, or whatever, what it is. Or maybe we'll convince him that it's just an abstract concept. It doesn't mean anything and you don't need to have that. I don't know. Like, who knows what we're going to convince him of. But I think that is the direction that his companion story is going to go in. I'm interested by the lore of Marius, especially since he's related to the Pergrunen, and the Pergrunen dwarves have a lot of knowledge that they would be holding in because they are, that they have access to, hopefully, because they are an older culture or subculture of dwarves within the world, and they have probably, at this point, explored most of Eora, even if they haven't settled in a lot of areas. And so I'm interested in the lore there. I'm not crazy about him as a companion so far, but I don't know a lot about him. I lean more towards characters like Kai, who have a sense of humor, or people like YATZLI, who have access to esoteric lore. Even Giada, though, she has a little bit of mystery about her that I'm intrigued by. But we don't really know a lot about MARIUS, so perhaps that's why I'm not yet interested. But we'll see more as they release information. Perhaps there'll be more gameplay where we actually get to hear MARIUS speak and get a little bit more flavor for his personality, which seems to be a bit more reserved and a bit more cautious, which I think balances well with what we've seen from other characters, especially YATZLI, who, actually, perfect timing, let's talk about the next companion, YATZLI.
Andras titties, you found it! YATZLI, wizard extraordinaire, godless expert, and a Balrog in the bedroom.
So, YATZLI. YATZLI, I believe, is already a fan favorite, partly because of her flirtatious nature, partly because of what I think will be a fiery attitude, which is always interesting to have in companions, but also because she is going to be one of the magic companions that we have, a spellcaster of sorts. We know that Giada has access to magic, and I believe I hear her referenced as a support character or more of a healing character, whereas YATZLI sounds like she's going to be a straight up and down wizard with just access to wizard magic, which is going to be a fun character to explore and have as a companion. As well, she has this obsession with an ancient group of people known as the Godless, which was a group of people that lived in the Living Lands a long time ago and have since then kind of disappeared, but we see their ruins dotted throughout, so she considered herself a scholar of this godless group. But let's dive into some more details about her before I just do this overview. YATZLI is voiced by Anjali Bhimani, and I don't know if I'm pronouncing that properly. She's known as the voice of Symmetra in Overwatch, amongst others. We first saw YATZLI showcased during the Xbox Games Showcase Deep Dive on June 10th, 2024, on the official Xbox podcast. She is described by Carrie Patel, who again, lead director of Avowed, as a little lightning ball with a lot of personality. She points out that she can get a little risque, and we see very quickly that her dialogue immediately takes a flirtatious tone. YATZLI is what is called a Orlin, one of the unique races made for the world of Eora. They're usually a lot shorter. They have these long pointed ears coming out the side of their head, and they are considered, you can see, they are very hairy creatures generally. YATZLI looks more like a Hearth Orlin because she's not as hairy as her Wild Orlin cousins, but the difference between Hearth and Wild usually tends to be where the Orlin is living and grown up from, and perhaps there is some level of like genetics there as well with people who have less hair and more hair in different regions of the world, but that's besides the point. Her background is Scholar, which we already talked about. She's a Scholar of the Godless, and her class, if she was one, would be Wizard. Again, Avowed is not a class-based system, it is classless. YATZLI definitely fits into that kind of character archetype of Wizard. She is seen in a picture in her cosplay guide. She has one just like all the other companions. She is seen holding a grimoire, which is indicative, really identifies her as a wizard-type character within this world. In the cosplay guide, there is a description about her just like the other characters, so let's read through this and see what lore we get from it. Practically born with a grimoire in hand, YATZLI has been slinging spells and taunts her whole life. While she lives in Fiormes Inverno with her loving partner, she's more often found in the ruins dotting the Living Lands. However, just because she's in dusty ruins doesn't mean that she can't adventure in style. With a flash outfit and a signature sent in her wake, YATZLI relishes leaving an impression on all she meets, good or bad. So there we have a little description on YATZLI is. Not a ton of lore to learn about there. We have learned that she has been engaging in spellcraft and magic for almost her entire life, which is very interesting. We don't know the background of her experience with magic. Magic in this world is fueled by something called essence, which is the stuff that souls are made of, and souls in this world are very real. But if she has a grimoire in hand, she's very likely accessing essence on an in-between realm, between the realms of life and death, if you will, accessing it through her grimoire, through arcane incantations, as well as symbols, and just like pulling that essence through the in-between using the grimoire as an anchor. That's kind of how wizards work, in short, but they're interacting with essence. So it's interesting to see that she has been interacting with essence her whole life, and I'm interested in hearing what lore has been written from her perspective. She is from a place called Fiorme Inverno, which people online have roughly translated as flower of winter, because fior in, I believe it was Italian, means flower. And even though the language is clearly in this fantasy world a Valian language, the Valian language is inspired by our real Earth world Italian, as well as a couple of other ones. And so it's a sensible translation that fior me Inverno is flower of winter, or winter flower. Inverno is this fantasy world's winter, essentially. That's what it's called anyways. And we don't know a lot about flower of winter, or fior me Inverno, other than it is a major Valian settlement in the Living Lands. In fact, this is where we know that the Animancers are within the game of Avowed. So there is this group of Animancers. And Animancers, if you don't already know, are basically soul scientists. You remember I mentioned essence, and that's the stuff souls are made of? Well, there are scientists and academics who have dedicated their lives to studying that essence, the properties of it, how you can manipulate it, what kind of things you can unlock with it, what kind of secrets it has, how it interacts with the world, the science of animancy. And that's what that is. And we know that there is a group of those people in this town, or this settlement of fior me Inverno. Now, this is important because the topic of animancy is a really controversial topic within the world of Eora at large. There are some countries that have outlawed this science altogether because of its potentially destructive nature. And it's understandable, right? Like, you're dealing with the souls of people and things, which has a permanence to it. If you scar someone's soul, then in the next life that they reincarnate into, there might be damage done if you scar the soul, if you will, right? So, like, there is definitely some things that can happen. And through animancy gone wrong, there has actually been things like the undead created, so if a town gets overrun with the undead and eats all the people in the town, it was very likely the result of animancy gone wrong. And so these animancers have probably moved to the Living Lands because there's no regulations there. This is a completely lawless frontier, technically speaking. It would just be the individual towns that kind of control themselves, perhaps adopting the laws of their colonizing nation. But largely, the entire area is its own region with it's just lawless. It's a frontier. So these animancers can come to the Living Lands, settle down in Fior, or settle down the place of Fior, and study animancy the way they want. Me personally, I'm very interested in seeing this because the lore around animancy is really incredible. A lot of the esoteric and metaphysical lore that we get comes from different animancy studies, and I'm interested in seeing the approach that these animancers take. Like, what is their speciality within animancy? Are they more about plumbing the depths of the secrets of reading the soul? Are they more about seeing what uses essence have with everyday objects? Are they going to try to do, teleportation like other groups have? I'm interested to see what their focus is going to be. It is also in this town that the other companion, Giada, apparently is from, where her parents, also animancers like herself, died in a lab accident. I don't know if we meet Giada here in Fiora or if we meet her earlier in the game and she returns here, and if it's like MARIUS where she hasn't been here for a while, who knows. But the area is definitely home to those both. So I'm interested in also seeing Giada and YATZLI and their interplay and how they talk to each other. I wonder if they knew each other at all, or if YATZLI is kind of a recent person in this region. Perhaps she's only here because she has a partner here, a romantic partner. Now, it says here that she is often found in ruins dotting the Living Lands. It doesn't say in the description that she studies the godless, but we know from seeing her in gameplay demos and reveal trailers that she is someone who studies the godless. And the godless are an ancient race of people who previously inhabited the Living Lands. The godless are not recognized as worshipping any known deity in Eora, and the ruined structures can be seen throughout the continent of the Living Lands. This is the entry written on the Pillars of Eternity fandom article, and I've already kind of mentioned them here. They were a faction of people that were in the Living Lands a long time ago. They're no longer here. We just see their ruins. They're called the godless because, and this is translations that we get from the murals of the ruins, that apparently they were viewed as not worshipping any of the known deities that we see in the pantheon of Eora. Eora has a pantheon of gods that are known to exist, and it seems like these godless people that were in the Living Lands didn't worship any of the 11 known deities, and so they're referred to as godless by other older cultures as well. There's a lot of speculation who the godless might be, if we've seen them or heard of them before in the lore from Pillars of Eternity 1 or 2, or if they are completely brand new. There's some theory that they could actually be the progenitors of the Glanfathan native tribes that we see in the Pillars of Eternity game. You could even make an argument that they were perhaps the Pergrunan dwarves before they were the Pergrunan dwarves in Old Valia. Like perhaps they're old cousins of them. You could make an argument for that. You could even say something along the lines of them actually being the original people who then became the Aedir nation, because there is this idea that I believe in one of the more esoteric books that you find in Pillars of Eternity, that the people of Aedir, or at least a subsection of them, originally migrated from a continent north of what is now modern-day Aedir. And this is all lore that only the deep nerds know about. So if you're new, sorry about talking about all these terms that you don't understand. But there's a lot of theories around who the Godless might be. Like, they might be a group of people that we know of or have heard about. But there's also the chance that they're completely brand new to this world, in the sense that there's nothing that has been written about them before over at Obsidian. So we really don't know, and I'm personally excited to learn more about them, which is why I think I'm going to have YATZLI around with me almost all the time, because she's going to be a fountain of knowledge, and she's probably going to point out a lot of things within the environments, especially as it pertains to the Godless, that is going to be interesting for people like myself who want to know more about the lore. I hope that there is a very quick companion changing mechanic in the game of Avowed, so that I don't have to constantly go back and forth to switch characters out. Because if I'm in one area and I have like Giada and Kai with me, and then I see a Godless Ruin, I don't want to have to go back somewhere to switch out to YATZLI just to have her for this like 12-minute excursion in a dungeon that I didn't know was big or small, to then have to go back and switch to the characters that I want to have for the quest I'm in. So hopefully there's a quick companion change out thing. But anyways, that's a hope of mine. It's not that big of a deal. I have to fast travel somewhere and then fast travel back. Not a huge deal, but that's my personal hope. Anyways, back to YATZLI, Fiora, and the Godless. The rest of the description of YATZLI just describes her personality a little bit through her aesthetics. She spends a lot of time in Dusty Ruins, it says, but she adventures in style. And you can definitely see by looking at the cosplay guide that she is a woman of style. Her hair is a bright color. Her clothes look very flashy and very unique. And again, she's got a risque and flirtatious personality as well. And this kind of comes through in how she presents herself. She is definitely going to be a very interesting and I think entertaining character to have around. Not that I want to reduce an entire character that Obsidian creates down to just a couple descriptors, but I'm definitely excited to see what YATZLI has to offer in terms of like character relationship and personality, but also knowledge of the world at large. She's definitely one of the ones I'm more looking forward to having around. But that's everything that I have to talk to about today about MARIUS and YATZLI, two other companions that we see that are going to be in the game of Avowed, and very central to the game itself. As Carrie Patel and others have said about companions, they're very core to not just these like side quests of their companion quests. They're very core to the experience that Avowed is going to have, the actual critical path, the main quests. These characters are going to be involved. So it seems like some obvious things there, that means that these characters can't die, and it probably also means that you can't dismiss them right off the bat. In Pillars of Eternity and a lot of other RPGs, you run into companions and you have an opportunity right at the start to piss them off or tell them to eat a dick, and then you never see them again for the rest of the game. Or you have to go find them again if you want to try to recruit them, if they're even open to doing it. But it seems like these four characters, no matter what kind of character you roleplay, they're going to follow along with you, it's going to be interesting to see, especially if you play a real absolute jackass. I want to see how Obsidian is going to justify with these characters how they stick by your side. We already know that there are some limitations in the game. This is not like previous Obsidian titles where you can kill and murder everybody. So perhaps when you are in the town of, let's say, Fiora, where Giada and YATZLI have people they know and love, perhaps when you're in that town, it's like a non-combative zone and you can't actually attack people that are around, which I would argue would cause YATZLI and Giada to leave you, right? Like, I don't see them finding a way to rationalize, like, you killed my family and everyone I love, but, you're an interesting person, so we're going to hang out still. Like, I don't see that happening. I would compare this a lot to, like, I've been playing Mass Effect recently, and when you're in the Citadel or you're in the Presidium, you can aim your gun at people in the Presidium, but when your aiming reticle goes over a person, then, Commander Shepard lifts his gun out of the way, you can't actually shoot, right? So I'm wondering if something like that might happen. where if you're within a certain radius of NPCs within a safe zone, if you will, you can't kill anybody. And the only reason I'm wondering about this is because I'm wondering how far you can take a roleplay in the evil direction without causing these companions to leave. Like, why won't they leave depending on the choices you make? And I'm excited to see that, right? I know some people might hear that and think that there is something lacking there. But for me personally, I think I could see, like, if I was at Obsidian, I would see that as a challenge to be like, okay, how can I create this character? How can I create these situations so that it's believable, but you still have this really wide range of roleplay? So me personally, just from like a design standpoint, curiosity, I'm interested to see what Obsidian does there to pull it off. I'm excited to play that. If you can't tell, I'm always excited about Avowed. And not just because I'm on this podcast, I would happily poop on Avowed if it was not good, but everything I see is great. And, well, at least I think it's great. And Obsidian has always, like, delivered, at least for me, right? Like, I've always loved Obsidian games, and I think they do great. Anyways, that was a bit of a tangent. We already talked about what this has to do with Avowed, even speculating on how it might work in gameplay. Let's just close out the episode and call it a day.
Is an oath worth the weight of a crown?
So I suppose the only other thing I could say about MARIUS and YATZLI being in Avowed, like talking about what does it have to do with Avowed, the only other thing I can think of to talk about would be what kind of companions are they going to be. We talked about Giada being a Healy person, and we know Kai is more of a tank character, so what might YATZLI and MARIUS be? All we can do is speculate. I think that MARIUS might be very good at dealing high damage on the side, but he doesn't take any aggro from characters, and perhaps YATZLI will be a good character for putting status effects onto things, like slowing them down or holding them in places or making them blind or making them sick while you are doing most of the damage. I don't know. We don't know enough about them yet, so I can only speculate. If anyone has any thoughts and ideas on the types of helpful characters and support characters that these companions are going to be, I'd love to hear your thoughts and put them on the show. worldofeora@gmail.com is the place to do that. As for what I have been playing, I completely finished Astrobot, for those that care. So I have platinumed the game, got absolutely everything, finished that game a while ago, and I have jumped back into the game of Grounded, actually, another Obsidian game. For those not familiar, Grounded is basically survival crafting, Honey, I Shrunk the Kids. If you want to be crass about it, I suppose. Well, crass maybe isn't the right word, but anyways, you are playing as teenagers that have been stuck in this backyard, not really sure what happened, and the game largely focuses on you gathering resources in the form of grass blades or weed stems, plant fibers, little tiny pebblets, and you're putting these things together as tiny little people to create these little bases and create weapons and armor and equipment that lets you explore deeper into the world as you uncover what has happened and why you're small and what's going on. And you'll run into obstacles that require you to make higher tier versions of things you already have. You'll need to create tools that allow you to go into specific areas, like if you want to dive deeper underwater, for example. It's a really, really fun game, and I've easily sunk 100+ hours into it. Me and my gaming crew just kind of decided to get back into it. We've added a new person into our crew, and they want to experience the game. We've kind of wanted to start over for a while, and there was an update not too long ago this year that added a sort of new game plus option to the game. So we're like, you know what? It's time to get back into it. Plus, me and my brother have been working on a surprise homestead that we're building for one of our friends who did all of the work to help us build our own little homes, but didn't build himself a little base in that game, so we're trying to return the favor by building one for him. And it's just been a fun project. Grounded is a really great game if you like playing with people, but you can't always get your schedules to align, because the shared world feature of Grounded means that you don't have to have one person who is always the host every time. Anybody can be the host at any time, and the work that gets done will save to the cloud, essentially. Not really the cloud, it saves on servers somewhere else, but it'll save somewhere so that when another person comes in later, the work you've done will be on their save file. It's a really ingenious way to do it, and I can't understand playing any survival crafting game as an adult human nowadays without having a feature like that, because we can never get schedules to align always perfectly. But yeah, that's what I've been up to. If anyone else has been playing Grounded, let me know about your experience. I love that game. I do a Pillars of Eternity podcast, and I have said out loud, in fact, I even said so on Twitter recently, that if I could only ever play one game, like if I was magically forced to only ever play one game ever again for the rest of my life, I would almost certainly choose Grounded. Now, that is with the exception that it would have to have its servers online forever, like it could never shut down. and hopefully the community is active in it so that there are always new interesting playgrounds that people are creating. But anyways, it's a wonderful game, especially if you are new to the survival crafting genre. It's a great one to start with, although you will be spoiled in the sense that it is the best, in my opinion, and a lot of the other games are not nearly as good. That being said, I should also mention, I haven't played a lot of them. I've dove into several after playing Grounded, and I didn't like them entirely, but I don't know if I dove deep enough to hit that gameplay loop that people get addicted to. So perhaps I should go back and revisit some what people would consider classics in that genre before decrying it. Anyways, sorry I went on long enough. Yeah, I've been playing Grounded. There you go. Let's close out the episode. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, or you just want to have a conversation about games because you're a geek like me, then send me an email, worldofeora@gmail.com. I love having conversations, whether it's about the show, Pillars of Eternity, Avowed, or games in general. I've been going back and forth with several people listening to this show for a while, and it's always great to hear how people are doing and the things that are going on in their lives, and just connect over different things and ideals. If you would like to follow the show on Twitter, @World of Eora is the place to go. I mostly just post updates on when the show has episodes coming out. I do keep up on any news related to Avowed or Pillars of Eternity, and I try to repost those, so it's a place for you to go. And lastly, if you would like to support the show, you can do so at ko-fi.com/worldofeora. I don't have any hidden Patreon content, like that kind of thing. Obviously, it's not a Patreon, it's a Ko-fi, but I don't have any hidden content behind that. I generally, anything I make, I want anyone to have. I simply put it there for those who like supporting things that they enjoy listening to. And if you've been listening for a while and you'd like to support the show, go ahead. But if you don't want to or you can't afford to, don't worry about it. I will continue to do this show with or without that. For those that have been supporting, though, I just do want to say on this episode, as well as a few others, that I really genuinely do support. I really genuinely do appreciate the support that has been given. It's been absolutely crazy to see people like the show enough, and then they actually come out of their way to support the show directly, and that's been so awesome, and I love that. So anyone out there who has supported the show, thank you so much. I genuinely mean it. I didn't expect anything at all, and yet it did happen. So that was very cool and uplifting. And the reason that I continued this show after the first year of making it was because I saw people were getting value from it, and so to see that kind of thing happening just re-emphasizes that. So thank you so much. Thanks everyone for listening to today's episode about two of the Avowed companions, MARIUS and YATZLI, just discussing a bit about their personality, where they come from, what they're interested in, and how that pertains to some of the lore we've seen from Pillars of Eternity 1 and 2. I don't know about you guys, I'm really excited about playing Avowed, and I can't wait to see these companions at play and learn more about their stories. But for now, I've been your host, Eric, aka Gingerino, and I'll see you guys next time.